My best friend Frank was soon to pick me up for a 4-day hunt, and I had to say goodbye to my wife. Frank loaded his pickup with everything he needed to hunt, dress, and transport his prey. We made sure that such preparation was the key to success. He flipped open the padded lid and opened the lockable box behind the cab. I put my rifle in the box next to it and my gear bag in a plastic box attached to the side. I climbed into the cab and took another look at the porch. The front door was closed. Frank pulled out of the driveway and headed for the highway. We quickly made our way to the old cabin that had been in Frank's family for generations. The current owner was his uncle Bob. However, Bob was no longer able to get around and Frank became the primary owner and caretaker. He has made several important improvements over the past few years, including better insulation and installing a more efficient wood stove so that we don't have to constantly huddle in the parkas. This season, he installed a satellite dish that not only broadcasts many channels, but also provides internet. "There's still no reliable cell coverage here," he said, introducing the upgrade, "but you can use WhatsApp over Wi-Fi if you want to call Maeve. You know, she doesn't expect much from me, and I like to linger here sometimes, so I guess I won't tell her about the internet here just yet." We'd watched SportsCenter at dinner, and now I was reading a John Sanford novel while Frank sat at his laptop. We were both sipping beers, but this was only the second of two for the evening. We weren't stereotypical yahoos just off for a drunken boys' night out, free of our wives. We actually wanted to test ourselves against nature and hopefully refill our freezers with venison. "Oh shit," Frank exclaimed. I closed the book but continued to keep my finger on my thumb looking at him. I expected the exclamation to continue, but Frank's eyes were still fixed on the screen. He was clearly reading, scrolling down the page. "Holy double shit," he said, then tore his gaze away from the screen and stared at me with blank eyes. Then a look of doubt appeared on his face like he wasn't supposed to be addressing me. I put my finger on the bookmark and asked, "What's up, Frank?" Was he looking at a news site? Had my house burned down or had Maeve been in an accident? His voice and face dropped. "Oh shit, you'll have to see for yourself." He turned the laptop 90 degrees so that it was facing the empty chair to his right. I rose from the worn chair, crossed the dining room table, and sat down. I shifted my gaze to the screen, expecting to see a horrifying headline. It wasn't a news site, it was some kind of social networking site. On the screen was a picture of a smiling Maeve. I called her smile evil. I looked up at Frank. "What the hell? What is that?" "Sorry, Matt, but it's a dating site," he replied helplessly. "A dating site?" Shit just wouldn't go through his head. "Look," he said, "you know that after Tracy and I broke up, I was in deep shit and for 6 months or more, I just sat around with nothing to do, barely holding a pen. I started checking Tinder and other sites to meet people. Women. Meet women." I looked at him more determinedly. "So some of these sites kind of skip the dating and go straight to the fun stuff." Frank's voice lightened when he said, "I've managed to get laid a few times, but there are wives out there too." "Wives?" "Well, yes. There are a few wives there, and a lot of husbands, who are looking for fun on the side." I looked at the screen again. Further down the page was another picture of my wife. My gut twitched. "Mav?" "Hey, Matt. Look, let me tell you something. I found there's a lot of nonsense and even fraud out there." He nodded toward the laptop. "I've come across fake profiles more than once that use a woman's name and image without her knowledge. Maeve could be a victim. I mean, I've never seen her here or on any other site before." I mentally grasped at that straw as I examined the profile more closely. The photos definitely belong to Maeve, but could they have been hacked from our own computer? The picture with the sly smile looked familiar to me. Then I noticed one detail that struck me in the heart. The outfit she was wearing in the second photo. The entire outfit cost almost $100. I knew this because I had bought it for her last Christmas. That picture was less than a year old, and I didn't have time to take it. I started reading. "Can you help me solve my daddy issues? And I don't mean sugar daddy. And I'm pretty sure my dad has wanted to for a long time, but can't. He can't yet. But I keep thinking about what it would be like. Sometimes I think of my dad the way he is now, middle-aged but still hot. Sometimes I think of him as the gorgeous young man I've seen in pictures. I can even envision a manly man in retirement who is still able to give mom more than she can handle. So of course daddy's little girl would be happy to help. So no matter what age you are, If you are clean and fit the description, please send a photo and let's meet. I am alone for a long weekend, Friday through Saturday, and would like some intimate daddy-daughter time. There was a box under the profile item that read, Current status, closing soon. I looked up and caught Frank's gaze. Daddy issues? What the hell? Look, maybe it's for the best. He must have seen my eyebrows fly up to my hairline because he hurried to continue. No, really, dude. Some of those cheating wives I was talking about, it's not that they're unhappy with their husbands or want to leave them, it's just that sometimes they have some zest they're uncomfortable sharing with him. Maybe they want to try it with a woman or a black dude at least once. Or do they have fantasies about daddy? I asked. Frank just shrugged his shoulders. I looked at the screen again and continued reading. Then a lump rose in my throat and I must have wheezed or something because Frank said, You found double shit. Double shit indeed. Dad's family comes from Greece and Italy, so he has a classic Mediterranean look. He has dark eyes and dark curly hair. He has a strong straight nose, but a slight Roman hump is normal. If that's you, I'm looking forward to a daddy-daughter date. And if you're 6 feet tall and have the physique of a long-distance runner, it's going to be a very hot date. What? What, actually? I know, Frank replied. I gotta say, Matt, I thought you were in on it, but the look on your face says otherwise. Not one damn clue, man. Not one goddamn clue. Frank and I were totally confused because Maeve's father, Sean, is a pale-skinned Irishman with rust-brown hair. The description she posted on her profile didn't fit him, but it did for me. Then I got to the triple crap. Under the description of Maeve's dream, Daddy was another box that read, Join the chat room. I started scrolling through the messages where assholes were chatting with my wife. And then one comment struck me. Hi, I have gotten a lot of free time in the last month. I hope you guys have a place for me. A reply from my wife followed almost immediately. Oh yes, I can definitely find a place for you. Write me and let me know when I can see you again. Did you have a good time last month? I can definitely find a place for you. When can I see you again? I'm out. My wife wasn't looking for one date, but many, and had been for a long time. She's done this before, I said, stunned. I raised my eyes to Frank. Can you tell me how long she's been on this dating site? I mean, that's what it is, isn't it? Maybe she's doing it for the money. I recoiled back in horror, half expecting Maeve to appear on the camera screen. Frank turned the laptop toward him and began to mouse over the touchpad. As far as I know, it's just a dating site, nothing more. As I see you've already guessed. He poked around the site some more. Well, it's not set up like she's running a business. These sites are full of pros and semi-pros, but I don't see any warning signs. He added embarrassedly, I guess she could be asking advice from the guys who answer her directly, but all indications are that she's doing it, for fun. He looked at the screen again and changed the subject. Okay, here comes an interesting variation. She also thought that once would be enough, I growled. If it really was only once. My shock was turning to anger. And she's arranging all these damn weekends while I'm out of the house? She tells that bastard she can make room for him? Whoa, Matt, whoa! It's not like she has a calendar here so you can see when she's free. It's like a pop-up site designed for quick dates, not long-term relationships. Make a date with her, I said. What? On her profile page, it says this pop-up site is about to close. Swipe right or whatever it's called and see if she's free for a date this weekend. I want to know if she's really having fun while I'm here in the mountains. Well, I could try to arrange a date, he said, though it was clear from his voice that it was the last thing he wanted to do. But I don't fit the description, and she seems to be serious. She wants to see a picture. It hit me again. She wants to see a picture of me. I wonder what she'll say if she gets it. Next chapter. I told Frank about my idea to set her up on a date using my picture, and he said he thought it was a good idea. Don't be one of those knuckleheads who let it happen when they have a chance to stop it. I reminded him that if she had done the same thing a month ago, it would have been too late. That got him thinking. Then I said I could still ruin the fun of this month by writing in the chat room that I would come home with a rifle and watch out for any assholes talking to my wife. Then he changed course and said it was probably best not to warn her. Look, she said she has Friday and Sunday free, so she'll make a date for that time. Frank and I took Friday and Monday each as vacation days to get the maximum amount of time to hunt on our licenses, so I wasn't expected home until Monday afternoon or evening. If you intervene in the conversation now or text her on WhatsApp, she'll have all the time before you get home to get all her lies and bullshit together. His voice took on a distinct tinge of anger, and I remembered that his wife Tracy had seemingly left him out of the blue, only to find out months later that she'd had a long-standing affair with her boss. But if we go there now, you'll get there early enough to stop all this crazy nonsense, and you can also catch her cold and in person with proof. He nodded and grinned, looking at a little girl's profile on his laptop. It was a little over 3 hours from home, and we discussed every possible option as we drove down the mountain roads and then the highway. We talked about how to prepare Maeve for tonight at our house, how to follow her to her scheduled date night, and how to ambush my dad when he showed up for the date. But the most serious conversation was about the divorce, which is likely to happen whether the dating stops this weekend or not. Frank's experience with divorce law was not a pleasant one, but his painful experience would hopefully protect me from the worst. 2 hours later, we repeated everything we wanted to say for the third time and drove the rest of the way in mostly silence. When we pulled onto my street around 10:45, Frank slowed down, preparing to stop in front of my house, but I said, "Keep going." He threw me a glance, but without saying a word, he pressed the gas pedal again. "Turn the corner and stop," I commanded. He did so, then looked at me again. There's a car parked on the street across from our house. I don't recognize it, and no one parks on that street at night. Everyone parks in the driveway or in the garage. She's already started, and she's doing it in our own house. Reaching for the doorknob, I said, "Thanks, buddy. You can get the hell out of here." "Screw it, buddy. We have a plan. We're either going to go check it out together, or we're going to leave together and deal with it tomorrow." "No, I need to know that now," I said. "One way or the other." "Come on, Matt, we've already talked this through. If she's alone, it won't prove anything. But you'll still have a mess in your head, and who knows what you'll say or do." "I need to know," I repeated. "Okay, plan B," he said, and turned on the gear. Maeve and I live in a quiet neighborhood with a lot of older people, so there's no traffic on the streets at night, and many houses don't have lights on. Frank spoke forcefully as we pulled up to the alley that ran behind my house. "Whether she's alone or not, we're doing the same thing. We look around and then we walk toward me. My own divorce taught me that this is all very serious. You have to think hard before you pull the trigger." He must have suddenly remembered my Sako Finlight 308 caliber deer rifle lying in a crate welded to the back of his truck, because he quickly added, "Figuratively speaking, of course." Of course, I thought. Frank parked at the far end of the alley and we walked in silence toward our house, keeping in the shadows. I lifted the lever on the outside of the alley gate, hoping Maeve had forgotten to close it when she put the trash cans out for tomorrow's pickup. As usual, she had. The latch opened easily and we slipped inside, behind a large oak tree. Our bedroom was in the back left corner of the house, that is, directly across the hall, and we could see a faint light behind the curtains. Frank and I moved as quietly as possible, not lifting our feet, just shuffling them forward so we wouldn't hear the crunch of fallen leaves underfoot. Our bedroom windows faced both exterior walls, and we crept up the larger of the two from behind, Frank on the left and me on the right, near the corner of the house. I hoped to peek inside, but the curtain was doing its job and blocking the view. From 4 feet away, Frank shook his head, letting me know he couldn't see anything either. I moved toward the house and saw a line of light in the middle of the window. The curtains weren't fully drawn. I crept up and put my eye through the gap. The bed was clearly visible from the side. The bed, Mav, and some old asshole. I was a second away from smashing the window with my fist when I remembered the Leatherman on my belt. It would do a much better job of disrupting their deceptive world with it. I managed to open the top of the holster before I felt someone's hand on me, preventing me from pulling out the multi-tool. It was Frank. He put a finger to his lips and then grabbed my wrist to pull me away from the window. I resisted and was about to push or punch my best friend when suddenly he let go of my wrist and I fell back on my ass. I looked at him, and he threw his hands in the air, turned around, and started walking towards the back gate. I caught up with him halfway down the alley and we walked together to his truck. I stopped next to him and looked at the vinyl upholstery, imagining there was a lockbox underneath. I knew it held not only 2 rifles but a .357 Magnum and 2 cans of bear spray that we carried for protection in the mountain woods. He ignored the pleading in my eyes and reached for the doorknob. "We've been here too long," he said. When I followed him and closed the door, he started the engine and drove out of the alley. There was a grocery store 3 blocks away, where our alley intersected with a large avenue, and he pulled into the nearly empty parking lot. The store was closing at 10 o'clock, and probably only the employees' cars were still there. "Why don't I go in there and kick some ass?" I asked. We'd already discussed all this on the way back from the mountains, but I needed to hear the voice of reason again. "Because you'll end up in jail," he said, as he had said several times before. "Besides," he continued, "it's not his fault. Sorry, dude, but he didn't seduce her like Tracy's asshole boss. Maeve invited him. He probably doesn't even know she's married. And I need to proceed cold and cautiously if I want to get out of this marriage to my best advantage," I said in a dead, mechanical voice, repeating Frank's mantra from the ride home. Next chapter. Back at Frank's apartment, the first thing he did was lock all the guns, including the bear spray, in the gun cabinet. He strictly forbade me to go near the guns while I was still in shock. Then we sat down at the counter separating the kitchen from the living room. We may have limited our drinking to the cabin, but now Frank poured us each a shot of tequila, which we tipped into ourselves, silently proclaiming a toast to a screwed-up world. Then he poured 2 more, but we drank them down to the bottom, washing them down with cold Pacifico beer. "She's cheating on you with you," Frank pondered, returning to the strange, disconcerting nature of the mystery, as we'd come to call it. Maybe she's trying to bring back that spark that was between you when you first met," he suggested. "I wasn't 55 when we first met. And besides, it's not like our bed has gone cold. Maybe she really loves you and only wants you. But more of you? Maybe she thinks daddy is the best way to explain why she wants this particular type." I pouted my lips and shook my head to tell him what I thought of that idea. But he continued on, trying to turn it into a viable theory. I finished my tequila. "What if you didn't tell her off for it, but suggested the idea of, opening up the relationship a little bit? If you helped her take care of her needs together instead of sneaking around, you could control the situation and get a little weird yourself." I threw another look at him. That look said, "That wouldn't happen in this universe." Then I held out my empty shot glass to pour another. Unsurprisingly, we slept through Friday morning, but once we woke up and recovered a bit, we got down to the parts of yesterday's planning that still made sense. First, Frank took me to the car rental agency, and I took their most unassuming sedan. Then I went to the bank, the services of which Maeve and I did not use. At the bank, I opened a checking account using the money from the trip that I had withdrawn from the ATM back on Wednesday. The new bank gave me an ATM card right away and promised to issue a credit card the following week. The bank teller who helped me looked about 30 years old, which is only a few years older than me. He wasn't wearing a wedding ring, and his expression was that of a hunted dog. I had to give him a utility bill or something to confirm the address I wanted to use because it was different from the one on my driver's license, but when I told him I was getting ready for a divorce, he immediately took pity and put in the condo address with no problem. I got the look on his face right. This was another victim of the marriage wars. The guy walked me through downloading the bank's app to my phone, and before I left the branch, I transferred half of our savings account and 20% of our checking account to the new bank. I had planned to do half of everything, but the surly banker, whose name was Jim, reminded me that until I got rid of the mortgage, car loans, and credit card payments that were automatically deducted from our joint account, I needed to leave enough money there to avoid ruining my credit rating in the future. Apparently, he's seen some crap in the trenches of divorce. I thought about going to work and asking HR Finance to transfer my direct deposit to a new bank, but 2 things stopped me. First, I didn't feel like explaining why I was still in town and not on the hunt. Second, I was going to pretty drastic measures out of a sense of caution, but I still didn't understand what the heck was going to ruin my 4-year marriage. The change in direct deposit and insurance beneficiary could wait until Monday. From the bank, I went to the T-Mobile store and bought a dual SIM phone with a top-of-the-line camera. I would be able to insert the SIM card of my current phone into the new one if necessary. For now, I kept the 2 phones separate, including putting a new contract in my name with my new address and bank account. I didn't want to make any changes to our family account yet because that might trigger a text message to Maeve and alert her to what I was up to. Frank and I weren't due back until Monday night, and he'd convinced me to use that time to my advantage, despite the still strong desire to just walk through the front door and tear that cheating whore apart. "Sir? Sir, is everything okay?" I blinked and realized I was still sitting at the table with the T-Mobile employee. She was explaining how to switch between 2 SIM cards, and I was obviously following my dark thoughts, dreaming of retribution, and that dream was obviously giving me a scary look. "I'm sorry," I said. "I banged my knee yesterday and these flashes of pain pierce me sometimes." "Oh, that doesn't sound good." There was skepticism in her voice. "I hope you feel better soon." Then she moved on to her examination, and I walked out of the store, limping. Frank and I met at Starbucks, and over a cup of coffee we discussed the next phase of the plan. Then we headed back to my neighborhood to put it into action. We left Frank's big, eye-catching truck in the same supermarket parking lot where we had parked the night before, only now there were plenty of cars to hide among. Frank drove us in my rental car down 3rd Street to my house. This time, as we drove by, my car was still in the garage, but Maeve's car was gone. Nor was the red Hyundai Accent parked at the opposite curb. We reached the alley, and I jumped out of the car and went through the back gate which Maeve still hadn't locked. My first thought was, I really need to talk to her about this. Sure, it's a nice neighborhood, but she still needs to take basic precautions. Then I thought, damn, am I really worrying about this? I dismissed the confusing thought and decided I was lucky she was careless about safety. Sure, I could let her right in the front door, but the retired neighbors might see me and then come up and ask why I'm already back from hunting, or mention it to Maeve later. Better stick to the spy shit for now. Frank went to take up his post in the supermarket parking lot. 95% of the time, Maeve and I got to our house on Tompkins Parkway in either direction and then turned onto 3rd by the supermarket. Keeping an eye on the house during the half hour I was supposed to be there was a little paranoid, since Mav was supposed to be at work, but better to be reassured. At least I won't have to worry about fingerprints, I thought as I unlocked the back door and entered the back room. The utility room had a hatch to the attic, and I used a pole with a hook on the end to fumble for the ring and lower the folding ladder. As I poked my head through the hatch, the radio on my belt beeped twice. It was part of the pair we used to communicate while hunting. The double beep was Frank's signal that he was in position. Every 10 minutes, he would give me another double beep as confirmation and countdown. I paused and jammed the transmit button for a long moment to make sure the connection was good. Attic was too generous a name for a storage room under the eaves. I had to crouch and duck to get across. Fortunately, the luggage I was looking for was only a few feet from the trapdoor. I took a canvas gear bag and an old briefcase as a backpack. I had bags downstairs that I liked better, but I wanted to leave as little trace as possible that I had been in the house and taken some stuff. I closed the attic, checking for any finger or footprints. My next stop was the alcove in the living room that we had turned into a home office. I pulled my passport, social security card, will, birth certificate, and marriage license out of the small safe and put them in a briefcase. The envelope contained $2,000 in cash, and I took half of it. There were also gold coins in there worth about $5,000 at today's prices. I knew that the likelihood of Maeve opening the safe was practically zero, but I didn't want to accidentally call the police if she noticed them missing, so I left them in and only took the purchase receipt. The next double key from Frank informed me that I'd been inside for 10 minutes, so I'd wasted a decent amount of time. I moved on to the bedroom. I didn't feel like going to work on Monday in cargo pants, a flannel shirt, and worn Timberlands. So I grabbed a pair of black slacks, 2 dress shirts, 2 ties, some dress socks, and an old pair of black loafers from the far closet. Too few items for Maeve to notice their absence. Now for the hard part. While we were at Starbucks, Frank and I played with my new phone. We finally learned how to take time-lapse pictures and back up our data. Shooting in time-lapse mode meant no sound, but we didn't think it mattered. Watching her having fun would be annoying enough if she couldn't be heard as well. Besides, we didn't think critical pillow talk would give away Maeve's devious plan. I placed my new phone on a cabinet against one of the walls, peering into the gap between my baseball cap and straw hat. I took a few test shots until I found a position where the phone was almost hidden but still captured 80% of the bed. I then set up a time-lapse and set it in place to capture the evidence of the destruction of my marriage. Before leaving the bedroom, I pulled back the edge of the curtains on the window where Frank was trying to peek, creating a small gap that would allow peeking from there next time. Of course, I didn't tell Frank about this part of my plan because he made it clear that there was no point in peeking anymore. And then Frank, as if his ears were on fire, relayed another 10-minute warning to me. I gave him a confirming signal and then moved into the living room for one last task. Once again, upgrading his Uncle Bob's hunting cabin, Frank had installed several trail cameras to keep an eye on the game. We had taken one of them with us before we came down the mountain, and now I had mounted it on a tall bookshelf to film the sitting area in the front room. The camera was motion sensor powered, and with a freshly charged battery and an empty SD card, I was confident it could capture all 3 days of the weekend. I'd have to pull out the SD card later to get the pictures, and my bedroom phone had to upload them to my cloud account every 6 hours. I returned to the alley with 2 minutes to spare and got Frank's last signal, two double taps on each other, as I walked into the parking lot of the store on the opposite side of the lot from where he'd parked, eagle-eyed at the corner of 3rd Street and Tompkins Parkway. Next chapter. We had both gone through the KFC drive-thru and were now sitting at Frank's lunch table with food and papers scattered about. We each had notebooks with to-do lists and brainstorming notes. It was like a planning session for a hostile takeover of another company, something I had participated in as a business analyst on more than one occasion. I didn't have much of an appetite, but the chicken tenders and fries were an easy appetizer. I was more interested in the double shot of Jack that Frank added to my Coke. "Okay, you should text her," he said. "Gotta keep things normal." Maeve knew the cell signal in the mountains was crap, and hell, she was probably counting on the lack of connection to keep the date from being interrupted by an awkward call from hubby. But our tried-and-true method of partial connectivity was to always have a sent message on me in case I hit a streak while wandering through the mountains and my phone was able to complete the sending process. I stared stupidly at the message screen. What the hell am I supposed to say? "Give me this," Frank said, snatching the phone out of my hands. "You're going to say what you always do." He scrolled back a few pages, obviously scrutinizing our usual text nonsense. "Oh, Homa, you're being cranky. No, we're not saying that. Okay, here they are, the usual texts on the run." He spoke aloud as he typed. "Hey, babe. We got here without any problems. The weather seems good. We'll be out on the trail early in the morning. I'll text again later. XOXO, Matt." He hit the send button and then started typing in a new number. "Okay, next call is to my and your if need be lawyer." Frank said that Kelly DeWitt had saved him from more abuse in a system that favored his wife, even if she had screwed it up herself. He also noted that even though he knew he was losing in court, he was pleased to see that Tracy was clearly upset that her husband's divorce attorney was a 30-year-old woman as beautiful as herself. The phone was picked up in DeWitt's office, and I listened as the lawyer apparently got on the line, and Frank took a couple minutes to exchange a few words and introduce me. He handed me the phone. "Hello, Matt," spoke a pleasant contralto. "I'm afraid Frank didn't tell me your last name. This is Karis, but please call me Matt." "Okay, Matt. Well, first of all, my condolences. I realize this all happened unexpectedly, and it's pretty ugly." "Yeah, pretty damn ugly. I apologize for my language." She laughed. "Don't worry about it. If you can't blow off steam with your lawyer, who can you blow off steam with?" I still felt guilty for my mistake, but relaxed a little after hearing DeWitt's words. Frank had told me she didn't like smugness and warned me about it, so I let go of my anxiety. "So you're my lawyer. Do I need a lawyer?" Well, let's start with the second question. I realize this is about infidelity. Are you willing to forgive that and possibly resolve it with counseling? Hell no. Good. Then are you willing to use the court's online system and file on your own? You have that right. That's only for those who aren't at fault, isn't it? I can't take the case to treason? That's right. If you want to file for a no-fault divorce, you'll have to go through the hearing process, and if you want to use infidelity to affect alimony and the like, I'd highly recommend getting an attorney involved. Okay, Kelly, that's what I thought. So can you represent me? Frank says you did the right thing by him. Did Frank tell you how much it cost to get our firm involved? Yes. Well, I'll tell you what, Matt. Our prices have gone up a little since then, but since you're advising Frank, I'll charge you the same as he did. Fair? Yeah, I agree. When can we meet? Matt, this is going to sound a little cavalier, let's put it that way, but I'll be honest with you. If what Frank told me is true, this is a very interesting case and I'd like to pursue it. I can fit you into my urgent schedule for Monday morning, if that would suit you. I put my hand on the microphone and said quietly to Frank, "She wants to start right away because the case seems interesting." He grinned and shrugged. "I told you, buddy." Miss DeWitt said, "Yeah, that would be great. Shall I bring my proof?" "Your proof?" she asked. Do you already have proof? I take it you just discovered the deception? Yes, but we took screenshots of her online profile before it closed, and Frank and I both saw her doing it with some guy last night. And today, I set up a camera in my bedroom that should catch any other bad behavior over the weekend. So she actually advertised to find partners? She said if a guy caught her eye, she'd get a really hot date. DeWitt thought for a moment. And she was looking for guys who looked like you? Yeah, but I still don't know what any of that means. Look, Matt, I don't want to get ahead of our meeting on Monday, but I just want to ask if you've ballooned to 300 pounds since you got married? Yes, Frank had warned me about Kelly's bluntness, but it still caught me off guard, and I answered her blunt question directly and with a slight rebuke. 6 feet, 180 pounds, which is 5 pounds heavier than when we got married. But now, I lift weights more and run less. I ran 2 10K distances last month, though. As for the second one, it is 6.5 inches and still good for 10 kilometers. After a brief pause followed, good, that's good to hear. Okay, Matt. After we hang up, I'll open a secure data transfer site for you and send you the login code. Frank knows the portal address. Go ahead and send me any evidence you have and I'll review it before we meet. Monday, 11 a.m. Is that okay with you? Monday at 11 a.m. Yes. I'll see you then. And Matt? Yes? Let me add my advice to what Frank told you. Stay away from your wife until we meet. I'd prefer that you don't come back to your house either. I only practice family law, not criminal law, okay? I paused for a moment. Okay. After I got the security code from the lawyer, and we sent her screenshots of Maeve's pop-up profile, Frank got busy spying on my phone. My treacherous wife replied to my message almost immediately. Miss you, but hope you're having fun. Happy hunting, love you, Maeve. Now my divorce coach was typing the next message to Maeve, letting her know we hadn't gotten a deer yet and were getting ready for bed. Then he carried the phone into his home office, opened the safe, stuck his hand with the phone deep inside, and closed the door, pressing it against his forearm. This will act like a Faraday cage, he explained. I'll press the send button, but the signal will be blocked, so the phone will keep it on. Then I'll turn off the power. You'll wait a couple hours, turn it back on, and it'll be business as usual. The message will be delayed until the phone detects an anomalous signal in the mountains. You read too many spy novels, I said, but inside I was glad he'd helped me. If I'd forgotten about the Faraday cage nonsense, I wouldn't have even remembered to keep sending messages to Maeve so she'd think I was still in one piece and out of her sight. Frank then went on to tell me about all of his financial affairs related to the divorce, including how he had to cover the mortgage on the house where his ex-wife still lived and pay spousal support for 3 years, theoretically so that Tracy could get the education and training necessary to find a better job that would allow her to get closer to the standard of living she enjoyed while living on Frank's paycheck. Unfortunately for him, Frank only found out about her leaving him almost a year ago after she had gotten rid of him and all the court judgments had been rendered. Now, even though she was still regularly copulating with the married bastard, on paper she was living alone, and Frank couldn't claim she was no longer owed alimony. I hoped that Maeve's outrageous infidelity would save me from having to fund her whore life like Frank was doing. We began to apply what Frank had learned by doing what people do in similar cases. I didn't incur much expense or loss by closing investment accounts and the like, but since I handled most of the family's financial affairs, I had all of Maeve's logins. First, I changed the passwords to those accounts. Then I changed the contact number on all the accounts to my new phone number and changed my email address to mine. As with the home safe, I didn't expect her to try to get into it, but once things got going, I didn't want her rushing out to grab my money. I canceled 2 more of our shared credit cards, paying them off with a joint check. The only one left was the one she used for everyday expenses, and on that one, I lowered the maximum limit. We finally approached the 6-hour mark when I started recording from my new phone in our bedroom. It was time to check the first data dump to my cloud account. I nearly lost my KFC when I saw what my wife's whore life included. I programmed my new phone to show up every 15 minutes, starting at the beginning of the hour, and took 6 pictures 30 seconds apart to capture the 2.5-minute gap. 15 minutes later, the bed was still empty, but it had already been made up. I went back to check, and yes, the pillowcases were different, so Maeve had obviously changed the bedding. There were 11 more groups of pictures. 6 were blank, and 5 had pictures of the other 2 lovers. I need to get out of here, I moaned, swallowing bile. Yeah, Frank agreed. Come on, I'll buy you a drink. No, I need to be alone. I don't think that's a good idea, Matt. Damn it, Frank, I need to throw up, I need to cry, I need to be alone, okay? I understand, I really do. But getting caught driving drunk or getting your ass kicked by another asshole isn't going to make anything better. I assured him I'd stay away from both the bars and my house, just get on the highway and drive. He didn't like that, but what could he do? He agreed to send pictures of all of Kelly DeWitt's daddies. Before I left, he reminded me to turn my phone on so Maeve would get my last message and so he could check on me. I thanked him again and headed off to fulfill my hour-and-a-half promise. I held off on the drink after all and got on the highway to drive. However, I only drove 30 minutes north and 30 minutes back before dusk had time to turn into total darkness. The supermarket was still open, so I parked among the shoppers' cars and repeated my earlier route, walking down 2nd Street a couple blocks to Elm, then halfway to 3rd and into the alley that ran behind my house. This time the trash cans were in the yard and the back gate was locked. After all, it was a wooden fence only 6.5 feet high. After checking on the neighbors and making sure no one was in the yard, I stretched out and swung over the fence in a second or two. Once I landed, I crouched by the fence, listening to see if there was any disturbing sound. Then, I followed the path Frank and I had taken the day before and crossed the yard with a hunter's pace until I came to the back of the house. The gap between the curtains I had put up earlier that day was still in place, and I got a clear diagonal shot of our bed from its lower left corner. In the last 2 photos, the bed was empty and made up, indicating that Maeve was taking a break between dates. It was different now. I was already headed for the back door when the phone in my hand beeped. An incoming message. I ignored it. I had already stepped onto the first step of the back porch when the phone vibrated and buzzed with an incoming call. This time I looked at the screen. Frank. I rejected the call. I jumped up and almost shrieked when I suddenly heard it. I see you, asshole, came from the darkness behind me. I turned around. There, looking at me through the back hedge, was Frank. He must have been standing in the back of his truck. Get your ass over here or I'll start honking. I crawled toward the fence, making more noise than I wanted to, but if I didn't get this asshole out of the alley, 911 would be called. The retirees are the best at keeping tabs on their neighbors. What the hell? I hissed at him. Exactly, he hissed back. She's in there with some damn toy soldier. I'm going to teach him some manners. I was seriously flustered. Get your ass out of here or I'll call the police myself. But now. Bastard. I had rungs on this side of the fence, so I didn't need to accelerate to get over them. I jumped into the bed of his truck, landed with a good rumble, and saw the 2 back porch lights burning next to my house and across the alley. Bastard. We got in the car and Frank drove carefully and quietly, keeping the headlights on until we turned onto the street. We were at a bar on Tompkins Parkway, 2 blocks from the supermarket. We sat in the far booth, and Frank made me drink a shot of Jim Beam and take a long sip of Bud before he let me talk. I'm done. She turned my house into a goddamn whorehouse. I'll never be able to sleep there again, but I'll be damned if I'm going to let that disrespect continue. Okay, then let's stop it. With that, he caught me off guard. What? Give me your phone. He held out his hand. I opened it. He went to my contacts list and tapped the top entry. Maeve. When the phone rang, he put it on speaker. It went through 5, almost 6 rings. Then my wife picked up the phone, gasping. Matt? Why are you… what a nice surprise to get a call instead of a text. You must really miss me. Hi, Maeve, it's me, Frank. Frank? Why are you calling me when Matt… Oh God, something's wrong. Is Matt all right? I'm afraid not, Maeve. He's had a bit of an accident. I don't think it's too serious, but I may be taking him down the mountain tonight, and I wanted you to know. Oh my God, what happened? Can I talk to him? What's wrong? Look, calm down. It's not that bad. I didn't mean to scare you because it's not that serious. I don't think it is, but I noticed that we had one of those rare moments where we get a good signal up there. You know, some sort of weather phenomena. Anyway, I thought I should take the opportunity to contact you and warn you. Can I talk to him? Well, actually, he's asleep right now. He hit his head hard on a tree branch in the dark, put an ice pack on it, and fell asleep. Hit his head. Do you think he has a concussion? Honestly, that's what I'm most afraid of. It's probably just a bad bump, but I'll wake him up every couple hours during the night. And if he's acting weird, I'll drive him down the mountain to the hospital in White River. Oh my god, am I really going to have to drive there? No, of course not, like I said. At this, Frank stopped talking, picked up the phone and ran his thumb over the microphone, dropping it under the table. Yeah, so there's no reason. Frank? Frank? Did I not hear the last part of what you said? Frank stroked the microphone once more. Lee 1 bar now. Tomorrow. He then cut the call off. Okay, he said to me. We've stopped it. I laughed for the first time since my world exploded 24 hours ago. I'm making conversation, right? Frank said as we walked down 3rd Street toward my house. Yeah, I agreed again. Just as long as that asshole doesn't talk nonstop. After I hung up the phone, I was suddenly very eager to find out if the prank had really worked. Frank was sure Maeve would kick the soldier out of our house and cancel all other dates if she thought I was hurt, but I needed to know for sure. He said, "Whatever the hell is going on, I still think she really loves you," and then held up a hand to stop my obvious angry response. I know, she's damn good at showing it, but even so, as we walked from the bar to my house, he said he'd driven by my house looking for me and hadn't noticed a single car on the street. He speculated that with the exception of the first guy who showed up on Thursday, even before her profile closed, she made all the other customers park outside the supermarket so as not to arouse suspicion from the neighbors. How considerate of her to spare me that embarrassment, I grinned. Shh, I think that's him. I looked ahead and saw a man walking under a streetlight, heading in our direction. He was dressed in an army uniform and wore a camouflage cap. Frank stood up so that he was between me and the asshole as we passed by. Good evening, he addressed the soldier. The bitch only half grunted through clenched teeth. He didn't look happy. Is the girl all right? Frank stopped and turned his back to the soldier walking by. The man stopped where he was and slowly turned toward us. A little girl? I don't know. Shit, Frank said, turning to look at me. He looks like you when you were younger. The guy furrowed his eyebrows and then his eyes widened as he shifted his gaze from Frank to me. Young daddy, meet your real husband, my friend said to the stunned guy. You like married women, don't you? I growled. Frank took a half step in my direction. Tom Thumb, he said in a low voice, clearly counting on the boy to hear him. Gee, didn't you notice any pictures that looked like your older brother when you were at that married woman's house? Frank asked. Now I understood his anger. My buddy had played Mr. Cool for me, but now, faced with an asshole like the one who'd turned him into a cuckold, his long-standing anguish was finally coming to the surface. She said she's divorced, the bastard stammered. Not yet, but soon. My voice continued to sound like the growl of an enraged bear. Oh, shit. Then the guy ran. I caught up to him even though he was 9 years younger, but I knew I could catch up to him in a block or two, and when I did, I'd walk right down his back. Frank turned around and stretched his arms out in front of me. No, man, no. For the second time in 2 days, I was close to shoving my best friend aside, but then I saw the misery on his face. I lost Tracy to a cheater. I don't want to lose you that way, too. I eased the tension, but I still wanted to pounce on the soldier boy. You've already lost the main battle, kid. If you go after that shit, you'll win a small one, but you'll lose the war. If you go after some kid, you're not going to get Maeve or respect back, but you'll become a general laughingstock and probably get jail time. I felt my shoulders slump as I watched him do the same. Maybe I'll beat him up a little, I finally said. Maybe in 6 months or so when we give you a good alibi, he grinned. Frank's truck was still parked at the bar, so we sat in my rental car in the store's parking lot. Waiting. Yes, Maeve had clearly kicked the soldier out before they formalized the relationship, and yes, I was in agreement with Frank's opinion that we'd managed to pour a bayonet of cold water on all her cheating, but still, I should have known better. Frank was beginning to tire of my obsession, but experienced cuckold and friend that he was, he agreed to give me an hour of his time. We spent the first half at the bar, sipping beers in what should have been toy soldier time, and then settled into my car. It paid off. A Nissan Sentra with out-of-state plates pulled into the parking lot and a guy got out of it. But he didn't go to the grocery store. Instead, he headed to the corner and looked up to read the street signs. That's how he ended up under a streetlight, and I figured it was a cousin who looked like me. This jerk had come a long way to entertain my wife, but judging by the pictures she posted on her profile, it was worth it. He headed down third, and I ran down second as soon as the corner of the grocery store hid me from view. My plan was to run to Maple, the street behind our house, then run around the block and back south to our house. Frank was going to give the guy a head start and follow him north on third, mainly so I wouldn't pounce on him in the street and blow up in my house following Maeve. I waited in the shade of a big tree at the corner of Maple and Third. Don't ask me if it was a maple. The guy walked up the street, stopped to check the house number, and then turned up the driveway to our front door, striding quite briskly. I walked 2 houses away from my house and hid behind a tree again in the darkness between the streetlights. He rang the doorbell, then took a half step back and struck a pose. The door opened, but only partially, and I saw light pouring out of it, but I didn't see Maeve. I heard her voice, but it was too quiet to make out the words. I guessed it was date canceled, when less than 10 seconds later the door closed in my father's face. The guy froze in place for a few more seconds, then apparently remembered how far he'd traveled to get here and knocked loudly on the door. The door opened again, must have been on the security chain, and this time I heard her say, "I'm sorry, but it's off. Now please get out of here before I call the police." Then the door slammed shut again and I heard the distinct click of the deadbolt. This time I heard the guy as well. "What the hell? Hey, bitch!" He interrupted his scathing tirade as the porch light on the house between us suddenly came on. As the door began to open, he spun on his heels and headed down our driveway to the sidewalk with a quick stride. I love curious retirees. Unfortunately, I didn't want them to see me, so I stayed behind the tree while old Virgil Leonard stuck his head out the door and looked the other way at the man walking down the street. When all was clear, I hurried down Third, fighting the almost irresistible urge to walk up and knock on our front door myself. Frank was waiting for me around the corner of Elm, and together we headed back to Tompkins. As we pulled into the supermarket parking lot, we heard tires squealing. Someone was burning rubber driving away from the store. "You shouldn't be angry behind the wheel," Frank said. "Very dangerous," I agreed. Saturday morning, after a restless sleep in Frank's guest room, I reviewed the camera footage from the night before and found that Maeve had become even more restless. With nothing new to say, I began preparing photos of my last 2 encounters with Maeve to send to my new attorney's data site. "Should I include the video I took through the window?" I asked Frank. Asked Frank? Asked me. "Hell no," he replied. "What you got from the other camera is enough, and it's best if we don't tell Kelly about going into the house." "Do you think that toy soldier pissed his pants?" I asked, sending the pictures off. Frank grinned. "I wouldn't be surprised." Then he stopped grinning. "Hopefully it'll be enough for him to grow up and stop showing off before he runs into a husband whose gun isn't locked up." "Damn, you just ruined my mood." "Well, let's send Kelly an alarm call. That should cheer you up." Turning on my phone and scrolling through another dozen messages and missed calls from Maeve, I dialed the message myself. "Hey babe, it's Matt. Sorry Frank scared you. I'm fine." Band-Aids, aspirin, ice, and sleep did the trick. I hate to leave without a deer, so I'll stay as planned. I'll see you Monday night. Love you. I hit the send button and was just reaching for the light switch when the phone rang. It was my lawyer. "Hey Kelly, didn't expect to hear from you on a Saturday morning." "Hey Matt, I was just checking your website and saw that your new package came in." I covered the microphone and asked Frank, "Should I tell her?" He nodded. "Kelly, I'm going to put you on speaker and have Frank tell you why Maeve's night ended with a whimper and not an explosion." "Good morning, Kelly," Frank said. "Good morning, Frank. What have you guys been up to? Did I hurt you guys badly with my barbs to Tracy?" Frank said as Kelly kept his mood light by inserting subtle barbs against Tracy into various documents and discussions that hinted at her promiscuity without crossing the line of accusation. "I think you'll like this," he said, and proceeded to tell Kelly about his prank call and subsequent text messages. He didn't go on about how I'd snuck up to the house or how we'd accosted a young soldier on the street. "I like that," she said when he was done. "And you're sure she canceled all the other dates and won't call back when she finds out Matt's okay?" "Wait a second and I'll tell you," I said. "She just responded to my last text." I typed it in and read it. "Screw the deer, come home. I need you. I love you. Please come home now." "I told you, man," Frank said. "What did I tell him?" Kelly asked. "That she really loves him, despite all this shit." Kelly, have you ever run into any real nymphomaniacs in your practice? I mean nymphomaniacs with serious mental disorders who can't control themselves? There was silence in the attorney's phone receiver for a moment, then she said, clearly pondering the question. I've had clients and spouses of clients with mental disorders, but I think it's a possibility. And I'm supposed to accept that? I muttered. Forgive her if she claims it wasn't her fault? Kelly, you've seen the pictures. How do you think I can stop seeing them in my mind every time I look at her? I don't think you can, Kelly reassured her. If she's diagnosed with a mental disorder, it will likely affect the type of divorce and the way the property is divided. But I don't think a judge would deny you a divorce after she planned everything to meet these men. This conversation forced me to make a decision. Kelly, how quickly can you file the papers? I can't live with this woman anymore. Yeah, I can see that, she said. Look, Matt, I have a couple ideas, and we'll probably have to meet with her and her lawyer before we decide which trigger to pull. But I'll have something ready to discuss on Monday, okay? Okay. But what am I going to tell her Monday night when I don't come home? You won't tell her anything. I'll be the one to tell her. So what am I supposed to do now? I asked. I read the list of your actions you attached to the first data transmission, and I think you've got it all covered. Anything else could backfire on the judge. So sit tight, be patient, and don't step on your own beak. Frank grinned and said, I'll tell you, Kelly, I'm doing everything in my power to keep him from doing it, but he keeps trying. Speaking of which, Kelly said, Matt, didn't you say you were still good for 10K? Frank and I froze and stared at each other wide-eyed. Was my new lawyer, who Frank called hot, asking about me not having erectile dysfunction? Yeah, I think I said something like that, I offered cautiously. Good, then run along. Bye, boys. And off she went. The phone rang again, only this time it was Maeve, and I turned it off. In order to take Kelly's advice and go for a run, I first had to go to the mall and buy new sneakers and other gear, since I obviously hadn't brought anything with me on the hunt. Frank went for a run with me, which meant I had to stop at 3 miles because that was already well beyond his comfortable distance since he only runs occasionally. I still felt like a caged tiger, so Frank came up with another way to vent his held-back emotions. We put the rifles back in his truck and headed toward the mountains again. This time, however, we only drove an hour before we arrived at the rifle range where we went before each hunt to shoot rifles and regain our skills. I had shot 4 times as much as Frank, so it was no surprise that he finished cleaning the rifle much sooner than I did and went to talk to the shooting master. I noticed that they both glanced at me now and then during the conversation. Well, what did he say? I asked Frank when we were back on the southeast road. Frank didn't hold back. He said he'd seen it before and asked if I could forbid you from shooting at anything but paper targets. I said I could. Frank kept his word, immediately moving my rifle from the safe to the gun safe as soon as we got back to his apartment. The rest of the weekend passed in agony, Frank acting as governor, keeping my mental engine from stalling. We watched Marvel movies, but he wouldn't let me watch any more spy pictures. We drank really good whiskey, but he would only pour me another shot after I'd had a couple Coca-Colas, club sodas, or coffee in between. He also handled my correspondence with Maeve, keeping me from reading her messages and letting her know, as he did me, that I was doing pretty well and very close to getting a deer. So I was looking forward to continuing on Sunday. And on Sunday, he sent a morning message that I had gotten in deeper and planned to spend most of the day in a tree stand. She's already starting to call you an asshole for not coming home, he told me with a laugh. Wait until she gets served with divorce papers, I replied. I guess some part of me was enjoying the payback, but mostly I was just so damn miserable. I loved this woman, and I never had any reason to think she didn't love me just as much. Maybe she really does have some kind of mental disorder that makes her love me so much that she has to hire doppelgangers to entertain me over and over again. I wondered if I would need the same therapy she did. After the 4th sleepless night in a row, I woke up Monday morning feeling exhausted but determined to get back to divorce camp. For better and for worse, in sickness and in health, that was the limit of what was possible. Maeve had too much planning to make it happen, and too much pleasure was on her face as one daddy after another drove her away. We started the day by texting Maeve that we had been so close on Sunday, and that we were leaving again this morning and probably wouldn't be back until the evening as we had originally planned. I apologized again for freaking out on Friday, but she has to believe me when I say I'm fine. I said this from the supermarket parking lot near our house, and her response followed quickly. You let me suffer in fear all weekend and you still can't give up that damn deer to come back early? Well, Maybe you should just go with Frank to his house because now I'm not likely to want to see you right away. I smiled, sensing the irony in her suggesting I do what I'd been planning all along. 15 minutes later, her car drove down 3rd Street and turned right onto Tompkins, her usual route to work. I drove up and parked in the alley behind our house. I wasn't trying to go full cover this time, but I also didn't want to attract the attention of the neighbors by parking out front. When it was clear, I went up and climbed the fence again, then entered the house through the back door. I grabbed my camera in the living room and my new cell phone in the bedroom. Then I grabbed a full-size suitcase from the 2nd bedroom, which for now served as a closet and pantry and was planned as a nursery in the future. Oh well, so much for that plan. My heart raced even harder when I thought of how far her betrayal had gone in shattering my dreams. I filled my suitcase with clothes and this time pulled gold coins out of the safe, as well as my laptop. I figured she had already heard the bad news from Kelly before she realized I was in the house. Back at Frank's, I pulled the SD card out of the camera and plugged it into the computer. Brushing my teeth vigorously, I went to the room I was occupying and, fully dressed, collapsed onto the bedspread. That's how I lay there, covering my eyes with my forearm, until Frank called me to let me know that the videotaping was over. When I walked out into the open-plan living room, Frank was in the kitchen making breakfast sandwiches in the microwave for breakfast with Jimmy Dean, and his coffee maker was gurgling. Ah, the bachelor life. You should watch the rest of the surveillance footage, he said. It'll make you feel better. My laptop was on the coffee table in front of his couch, and I settled in front of it. And then I noticed there was a shot of whiskey next to the Dell. 9 o'clock on a Monday morning? Another sign that I'm entering the life of divorced men. Well, why not? I downed my shot and prepared to stare at the computer screen. Frank was right. The video from Friday night to Monday morning was more entertaining than anything I'd ever seen before. And educational, too. After Private Little Jerk was pointed at the door and his successor was locked up, we continued to see snippets of Maeve activating the motion sensor, walking restlessly around the house, usually with her phone in hand, talking or texting, trying to ascertain the condition of her injured husband. This continued throughout the night. Saturday and Sunday it happened again, with Maeve looking very irritated and increasingly angry as I apparently brushed off all her concerns and requests to come home in favor of acquiring my holy grail, a large multi-point hunter. However, I paid particular attention to the way my wife was cleaning. I hadn't noticed it in the previous videos, but several items that would normally be in the living room were gone and now stood in their places. They were mostly pictures of me. Frank was sitting next to me, we were eating sausage cookies and drinking black coffee. Damn, I said. She really erased me, didn't she? Guess that security guard wasn't lying when he said Maeve filed for divorce. Wait a minute, come back, Frank said. Be back by the end of Friday. What did you see? I asked, going back to one of the earlier clips. Look at her hands, he ordered. Maeve was strutting back and forth across the living room with her hands up and actively texting. What? I replied to my own half-assed question. Oh, no rings. I scrolled through clip after clip until it was 10:30 Saturday morning. Okay, here they are. She really did play the divorcee role to the last. Kelly DeWitt, Esquire, had gotten up from behind her blonde wood desk to greet me as the firm's secretary directed me to her office door. Now she stood, still holding my hand after a handshake, but already stepping back. She was indeed an attractive woman, about 180 centimeters tall, in a well-tailored suit that emphasized her slim but firm figure. But I resolutely kept my eyes on her. Dark amber, with a small almond-shaped slit. She, on the other hand, defiantly shifted her gaze from her toes to the top of her head, pausing noticeably in the middle. 6 feet, 180. Long-distance runner, got a little muscle tightening in the last few days. I suppose that means I can accept the rest of your self-description as true as well. Thankfully, she phrased it as a statement rather than a question because I had no idea what I was supposed to say next. Please have a seat, Matt. I'm sure it's been a rough weekend. How are you feeling? Tough, that's for sure. Anything new from Maeve? I'd sent her a few messages from my wife, including one asking me not to come home. This just came in while I was parking the car. I held out my phone to her. Baby, please, 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 ignore my last message. Yeah, I'm mad as hell at you, you idiot, but I need you home as soon as possible. I'm dying here without you. Please, Maddie, please. Okay, Kelly pondered. If my feelings are correct, it doesn't seem like your wife did what she did to get rid of you. What's more, I have a feeling that once she finds out that you know, she won't try it again. Hell, she might not even try. And what? I'm supposed to rely on that? And there's no way I can pretend it didn't happen. No, of course you can't. But if she explains the reason and promises it won't happen again, is there any chance you'll forgive her and continue your marriage? Kelly raised her hand to stop me when she saw my mouth open for an obviously angry response. I have to ask about reconciliation, Matt. The judge is going to insist. And I mean, I get the feeling you really do love her. I do. But I don't see how I can. You've seen some pictures and short clips, but you didn't have to sit through the whole show to grab the tiger by the tail. Only later did I realize that Kelly didn't need to ask what I meant by that comment. Apparently, the old Tigger had made an impression on Miss DeWitt as well. She simply said, "Yes, I understand, but as I said, I practice family law, and we have to at least understand if a family can be preserved rather than destroyed. And you have to remember that Maeve will likely fight to keep you two together. She won't be able to force me to go to marriage counseling, which I'll have to pay for, like she does in divorce stories, will she?" Kelly chuckled. "I'm sure not in this case. Okay, let me tell you what I have in mind, and then we'll need to work out the property and financial details. If you want the case finalized as soon as possible, we need to prepare a settlement plan. Since I'm getting a divorce for infidelity, do I still have to give her half of everything and pay child support since my income is twice hers?" Kelly spent the rest of the morning answering these and other questions, and by 1 p.m., including working on the sandwiches she delivered, had sketched out a plan that I felt would help me get out of my broken marriage with the least amount of damage to my situation and finances in the future. It was time to pull the trigger, and I nodded to my trigger-prone attorney Kelly DeWitt to fire. She put my phone on speakerphone and then hit the speed dial button for my soon-to-be ex-wife Maeve. The call was answered before the first ring ended. Maddie, where are you? Did you come home? Are you okay? What the hell are you playing at, asshole? Oh God, baby, I need you. Where are you? Mrs. Karras. Kelly was almost yelling to interrupt Maeve's tirade. What? Who is it? Oh my God, she screamed. Where's Matt? What happened to Matt? Mrs. Karras, my lawyer said even louder. Obviously, using my phone to call my wife wasn't the best plan. We were just afraid she'd ignore any incoming call not from me or Frank. Mr. Karras, Matthias is fine. He wasn't hurt at all. He's fine. Fine. But Frank said, "Who are you and why are you calling me on Matt's phone? Are you sure?" Mrs. Karras, Mr. Karras gave me his phone to contact you because he wanted to be sure you'd answer the phone. I assure you, he's doing fine. In fact, I'm afraid Mr. Spinner's reports that Mr. Karras was injured were a hoax, and here I would like to offer you my personal condolences for the unfounded fear they instilled in you with their antics. Kelly stuck her tongue out in my direction. A prank? A prank. What the hell is going on? I'll ask again. Who are you and why are you calling Matt on my cell phone? Mrs. Karras, let me repeat that I am using Mr. Karras's phone with his permission, and I should also let you know that this call is being recorded. Do you mind? Maeve's voice trailed off. She was still angry and scared, but even more puzzled. It's being recorded? Why? Who are you? Mrs. Karras, my name is Kelly DeWitt, and I'm an attorney with Green Family Law in Springville. Your husband, Matthias Karras, has assigned me to represent him in the dissolution of your marriage. The dissolution? Yes, ma'am. Mr. Karras has informed me that he would like the dissolution of the marriage to take place as soon as possible, but is not interested in making this sordid affair public unless it is necessary. A sordid affair? I easily pictured Maeve, stunned, glassy-eyed, able only to repeat Kelly's words. I doubted she was even on her feet. Yes, Mrs. Karras. Normally we would just serve you with a divorce notice, but Mr. Karras is hoping we can reach an agreement that will avoid court. The purpose of this call is to notify you of what is happening and to advise you to contact your attorney as soon as possible so he can get in touch with me. Attorney? Yes, ma'am. Do you have a pen and paper handy, Mrs. Karras? I'll give you my contact information to give to your attorney. What? No, I don't have it. Okay, that's not a problem. After I hang up, I'll send you a text with all my contact information. However, after that, the phone will stop working and you won't be able to contact me or Mr. Karras through it. But I need to talk to Matt. This is all wrong. It shouldn't have happened. We love each other, and is he there? I need to talk to him. This can't be. I'm sorry, Mrs. Karras, but Mr. Karras isn't ready to talk to you. So you need to have your lawyer contact me to relay any message for Mr. Karras. I'm hanging up now, Mrs. Karras. Please have your attorney contact me as soon as possible. Have a good day. She hung up as Maeve began to speak the next sentence. That went well, she said, sending a text message with her office information to Maeve's phone and then disconnecting her own. There was sarcasm in her words, but at the same time there was sadness in them. Are you okay? I asked, though it seemed an odd reversal of our roles. I like protecting wives and husbands from abusive spouses, but cases like this make me homesick and tired. There's something strange going on here, Matt. I think you're doing the right thing, the only way possible, but I don't sense any vindictive connivance on your wife's part. For whatever reason, maybe even an uncontrollable addiction, she's blown up the center of her life, and neither of you will walk away happy. Screw me, I'm not even 30. Have I already seen the last happy day of my life? Kelly shook her head and body vigorously, trying to pull herself out of the gloom. No, she said. It sucks, and it's going to suck for a while, but it's not the end of the book, just this particular chapter. As part of our services, we'll connect you with a therapist. If you take counseling seriously and follow the advice you get, you'll get out of this situation much faster, so I hope you do. Ask Frank. I know he won't mind if I tell you that he waited too long to use these services, and it cost him a lot of wasted time and unnecessary pain. Yes, it did, Frank confirmed a few hours later as we ate chicken wings, chilled shrimp, and Bloody Marys at happy hour at a downtown sports bar aimed at office yuppies. I brushed it off as psychological nonsense that a real man doesn't need, but I just ended up wallowing in my own shit like a clogged toilet bowl. You didn't talk to me long, and you could have talked to me more, I said, trying not to imagine his last metaphor. I know you had my back, but honestly, it hurt more than it helped, at least until I went to an outside counselor. But why? I asked. His face crinkled. Because of you and Maeve. You were so happy, seemed so perfect, and it made me grieve even more for what I'd lost, especially when I realized I'd been living a lie for so long, unaware of anything. I didn't know what to answer and just sipped my drink. Then, after seeing Kelly's therapist, I was finally able to start looking at the two of you as a sign of hope for the future instead of a reminder of the past. His voice broke. And it all turned out to be another lie, I said. Screw me, he muttered. Screw me, I repeated, and held out my glass for a toast. We clinked quietly and drank deeply. Hey, Matt, have a seat. Kelly DeWitt turned to me for the second time in 2 days. This time we were in a small conference room, and a few papers were spread out on a table that could seat 6 people. It was 3 o'clock Tuesday afternoon, but I wasn't at work because, having gone in the day before to change my direct deposit, family contacts, and beneficiary information, I had consulted with my manager who had given me the day off today and allowed me to take the rest of the week off if I needed it. I spent the day mostly at Frank's house, looking for an apartment to move into. I definitely wasn't going to live in my crumbling house again. We'd have to sell it if Maeve didn't want to buy me out. I'd run 5 miles this morning and another 3 in the hour before I met Kelly. I hoped the mixture of endorphins and fatigue would help keep me calm during what I expected would be a test of my emotions. When she called me to make an appointment, Kelly said she had talked to Maeve that morning and that my wife had explained the whole fiasco with Dad to her. Kelly said that I really needed to hear it in person, that it was too weird for a phone conversation. When the receptionist ushered me into the conference room instead of Kelly's office, my gut clenched, and I half expected to see Maeve and her lawyer there waiting to ambush me. I must have exhaled loudly because Kelly laughed in relief and waved her hand toward the room as if to demonstrate that it was empty. No, just the two of us, she said. Just needed some space to work, that's all. When I sat down at a table in the corner, away from her, she added, although Mav herself begged me to be here to tell you all this, if this were a TV show, it would be a classic showdown. Then I guess I'm glad it's not television, I said. Kelly grinned slyly. But when I thought about her yesterday after we met, I realized how glad I was that she wasn't the slightest bit like Maeve. Kelly said, I think I'll see the surprised and shocked expression on your face, but I can only imagine how much better it would be if you heard it from your wife's mouth. Stop escalating the situation, I said. Hear what? That she did it all for you, she said. I'm sure she got more than she expected, I said with a shocked look. What the hell? I said, barely keeping myself from swearing. The smirk disappeared from her face and she put one hand on top of mine where they suddenly clenched into two fists on the tabletop. The knuckles of the thumbs and index fingers of each hand made contact with the twin fingers of the other, and all knuckles turned white from the sudden squeeze. That bitch claimed I was some kind of willing cuckold? My voice rose and my hands moved to the edge of the table, ready to push off so I could stand up, and Kelly nearly swung over the corner of the table and grabbed my wrist tightly. No, no, no. Oh God, Matt, no, I'm sorry, I messed up again. I half relaxed in my chair and stared at her. I acted like a wise ass again. I didn't even realize you'd take it that way. I'm sorry. I relaxed even more and shook my head questioningly. She let go of my wrist and straightened up in the chair. Maeve didn't say anything like that. In fact, she's pretty upset that you found out and dumped her. Dumped her? I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but that's exactly what I did, wasn't it? Then what do you mean by saying you did it all for me? A child, she said in a quiet, pathetic voice. It struck me at once. We'd been trying to have a baby for 11 months. She had found some guy who looked like me to get pregnant since I hadn't worked out yet. I knew she really wanted a baby, hell, we both did. But I didn't think she wanted one so desperately that she was going to such crazy lengths. Was she doing this to get pregnant? I asked, looking for confirmation of my outrageous conclusion. Yes, Kelly replied. Here, you need to take a look at this. She slid some pages toward me. It was a lab report from some medical center, dated 3 months ago. I didn't see my name or Maeve's name in it, but I recognized the name of her gynecologist, the doctor who'd made the request. It took me a couple of minutes, but eventually I found out that Dr. Wellborn had provided 2 samples from patient 25473, and in both, according to the attached chart, the values were well below normal. Am I patient 25473? I asked. Kelly nodded. But how did she get those samples? For the first time in our brief acquaintance, I saw embarrassment on Kelly DeWitt's face. She actually secretly got the samples for analysis when I failed to get pregnant after 6 months of trying. I said it as a statement, not a question, but Kelly nodded anyway. After she got the test results, instead of talking to me about it, she recruited guys who looked like me as donors, and decided to accept their donations the good old-fashioned way. Kelly said, she said that your health insurance didn't cover ART or assisted reproductive technology, which can be pretty expensive, and that you had already dug deep into your savings last year to buy the house where you hope to start your family. I closed my eyes and leaned forward until my forehead hit the desk. Next chapter. Oh shit, I exclaimed, lifting my head from the desk. I began tapping my fingertip diligently on the birth report. That means I won't have to pay child support if her plan works, right? Kelly's face grew even sadder. You'll still have to be tested since you have a low but not zero, she said. But it probably won't be necessary. Why not? What's wrong? My stomach clenched into a lump. After Maeve and I talked this morning and she realized she'd been exposed and you're threatening her with divorce over it, she went to see her OB-GYN. This Dr. Wellborn gave her the morning after pill for emergency contraception. But today is not the morning after, I said. Thursday night she was with her first boyfriend. She asked Dr. Wellborn to call me to confirm that this was true, and the doctor confirmed it. I didn't know how to feel about it. Maeve had made a crazy effort to conceive a child, but now that she knew I wouldn't become an ignorant cuckold and raise someone else's offspring as my own, she was literally erasing that mistake. It was also damn sad. Then came the next belated realization. She did this to me just before I left for my hunting trip on Thursday. She was clearly preparing me to get her pregnant. She'll probably pounce on me again as soon as I get home to reinforce the idea that I was with her when I ovulated. She took all those guys with her bare hands and would do the same to me on Monday. God only knows what diseases she picked up. The lawyer returned her right hand to her left. I'd always assumed a lawyer held her client's hand figuratively, but I appreciated the gentle warmth of her smooth palm on the back of my hand. Unfortunately, such sordid details are an important part of this business, she reassured me. And the fact that STDs are passed from one spouse to another is something we think about all the time. First, to keep our clients safe. And second, from a cold point of view, they can play a role in tilting any settlement in our client's favor. But apparently Maeve was thinking about that too when she made the appointment. Matt, yesterday after our meeting, I reviewed the security footage you gave me on that flash drive and noticed a strange detail at the beginning of several of her visits. I figured this guy was new to her, or they'd already hooked up a month ago when she'd obviously been doing it. Oh shit, I muttered. What? Kelly asked. She did it a month ago too. I still have to take the test. Uh-huh, Kelly picked up on that. She confessed too, though she insisted it was the first and supposedly only time. She said she was only able to sneak into the house for one night. Some story about visiting a sick sister, and had only met 3 guys in 2 days. When that didn't work, and the long hunting weekend coincided with her next ovulation cycle, she decided to reach out to more donors to increase her chances of getting pregnant this time around. Again, she vowed to return to fidelity afterward. Until it's time to have a sibling for my child out of wedlock, I thought we agreed we wanted at least 2, and possibly 3 children. I shook my head, trying to push away the heartbreaking thoughts of losing my dream family. You said something about the camera video and how it had something to do with STDs? Yes, Kelly picked up on it. When you watched the camera footage, did you notice how she often looked at her visitors' smartphones right after they came in? Yes, I noticed that. I figured she was checking to see if they'd actually been invited. Kelly's face turned grim. Turns out she was checking their current STI and HIV test results. Disbelief must have been reflected on my face because she continued. Yeah, I know, right? But they get tested regularly. So what? I asked a frozen Frank, recounting to him all of Maeve's maneuvers that night over pizza and beer. Do you do? Do you get tested regularly and carry the results with you on your phone? Well, actually, yes. I always go wrapped too, but I carry the tests with me. You actually go to the lab while your new friend watches you and look up your latest results online. That way you can be sure it's not a fake health certificate in front of you. And if I ever start dating again, I'll probably have to do that stuff too. When you start dating again, he emphasized. But yeah, I'd recommend doing that, man. I gotta say, he continued, I'm surprised Maeve's lawyer let her blurt out so many details early in the negotiations. Well, that's because she doesn't have a lawyer yet. Kelly apparently discovered her this morning in front of her office and insisted on talking to her right away. Kelly again advised her to get a lawyer, but Maeve was convinced that once I knew the truth about her actions, I would call off the divorce and lawyers would no longer be needed. And what came of that? He asked wryly. Kelly said that almost to the very end of their meeting, Maeve made it sound like her whole plan made sense and was actually showing me how much she loved me by inviting me over to her house tonight. In response, Frank offered me another beer as we sat in the kitchen of his apartment, where I expected to stay until I decided if I could even continue to live in the same city as Maeve, let alone live together. A week and a half later, I was sitting in the same conference room in Green's family law office. This time, however, Kelly and I were sitting side by side on one long side of the table, and Maeve and her attorney were on the other. Mr. Karras, Miss DeWitt, the balding man said, placing his hand on the stack of papers on the table in front of him. I'm afraid we have 2 problems. First, Mrs. Karras still intends to maintain her marriage to Mr. Karras. He paused and quickly ran his other hand over Maeve's arm as she tensed, as if about to confess her love to me again or throw herself across the table to receive the embrace I'd refused when they'd first entered. Apparently, lawyer hand-holding is a real skill, and I wondered if law school had seminars on the subject. When Maeve reluctantly sat down, he continued. Second, if reconciliation proves impossible, the proposed agreement, he tapped his finger on the papers, is completely insufficient. It talks about a 50-50 division of property, but it doesn't include all the assets that should be considered marital. And the proposed amount of spousal support is too small and too short-term to significantly reduce the standard of living my client enjoyed during the marriage. I felt Kelly's foot touch mine under the table as if to say, I told you so. I nodded my head weakly, acknowledging my mistake. Though no, I couldn't call it a mistake anyway because I had done the right thing. Mr. Philpott, Kelly cut in, I hope you're considering the fact that Mr. Karras has agreed to pay 60% of your own fees as part of the assets you count. It also shows a remarkable sense of justice in a man who has been incredibly wronged. The judge will certainly take that into consideration if we can't resolve these issues here, and they will be left to the discretion of the court. Yes, I really was going to pay for an attorney working against me. I wanted this damn case to be over with, but since I really thought Maeve was deluded and not violent, I needed her to be treated fairly. Not in the sense that she still got half of everything I owned, including a future for a while, but in the sense that she wouldn't have to move in with her parents in Idaho or to a shitty CPD in a dysfunctional part of town. But she still insisted that she didn't need a lawyer because we shouldn't get divorced. And even if she changed her mind, with her salary, the best she could afford was some ambulance chaser doing divorces on the side or some kid fresh out of law school. So I advised Kelly to find someone for her case. Not the best in town, but someone in the top 50%. And also, my deceptively nice lawyer continued, letting Mr. Philpott's retort pass by, when it comes to quality of life, what about my client's quality of life? You've seen the evidence, Mr. Philpott. What do you think happened to Mr. Karras's quality of life if he's forced to present these images in his head every night? It was a bit histrionic, but Kelly wasn't really exaggerating. I struggled. I'd already had 2 sessions with a therapist, and so far I couldn't say it was helping, but both Kelly and Frank assured me it would eventually. Ironically, the psychiatrist's counseling was covered by my health plan, even though there was no need for AART, which would preclude its necessity. I'm so sorry, Maddie, so sorry, Maeve sobbed. Philpott squeezed her hand again. Miss DeWitt, the 50-year-old man said, as if his much younger counterpart still had much to learn. While I can certainly sympathize with how Mr. Karras found out about his wife's attempts, our state's laws state that these matters do not play a role in the division of marital property or the awarding of spousal support. If it comes to a motion for a non-negotiated dissolution of marriage, Mr. Philpott, Kelly snapped back, but if your client won't agree to the non-negotiated divorce petition you're considering, then we won't file that petition if we have to go to court. She placed her hand on her own pile of papers, which was considerably thicker than the one Philpott was referring to. This petition for dissolution of marriage will be filed because of your client's fault, and the only reason will be his adultery. She slid the packet toward Philpott. The settlement terms in this case are much less generous than the first. I saw his hand tremble, as if he wanted to open the package, but the professional held back. Okay, I'd gotten Maeve a fair enough representation. While making the facts of this case public would be incredibly embarrassing for Mr. Karras, I suspect the same may be even fairer for Mrs. Karras, especially since we will subpoena the names of all the participants in your client's many affairs to testify in court and conduct a paternity test on the child she tried to conceive with them. Maeve gasped, then made a sound of black sadness. Okay, stop it, shouted an indignant Philpott. There's no need to be so rude and belligerent, Miss DeWitt. You know perfectly well that Mrs. Karras has taken steps to avoid any such conception, despite her fervent desire to add a child to Mr. Karras's family, a desire which he fervently shared. My child, our child, I whispered. Kelly not only placed her hand on top of mine, but pressed my leg against hers. But he'll be ours, Maeve exclaimed. He'll be ours, yours and mine. The lawyers quickly agreed to a short break to consult with their clients, and Kelly dragged me into her office while Philpott took Maeve out for a walk in the parking lot. As I was saying, Philpott picked up as we reconvened, Mrs. Karras was brave enough to go to the drastic measures her husband's stubbornness forced her to in order to prevent the conception of a child. Even if, I might add, it could have been Mr. Karras's own child. Kelly stood firmly on her feet, clearly sensing that I was ready to pounce on the table myself and pound my wife's sanctimonious mouthpiece. My attorney changed things up a bit, and her next words were softer, more understanding, and directed at Maeve. We understand that Mrs. Karras made a very difficult decision and did the right thing under the circumstances, and Mr. Karras and I understand the pain she must be feeling from that decision. Kelly shifted her gaze to Philpott. Unfortunately, it has not yet been medically determined whether your client's intervention was successful. It happened so late that she may indeed be pregnant. The only way to preempt my client's well-being is to prevent this threat, so to speak, at the root. I cast a wary glance at Maeve. She was a naturally pale woman, but now she looked terribly gray, and I was afraid she might faint and fall to the floor. Kelly continued, there is a provision in the no marriage proposal that would deem the paternity of any such child as not belonging to my client. However, Mr. Karras will agree to take a paternity test to confirm that assumption. If we have to go down the path of proving guilt, we will naturally demand the same of any of the child's possible fathers. Kelly wanted to add something like, if she decides to carry the baby, but I vetoed that. There was already enough blood on the table to twist knives. Now it was Maeve's turn to squeeze her lawyer's hand, Apparently, they'd been discussing the way forward during the break. While all that's aside, Philpott said, we'd like to go back to Mrs. Karras's first position, not to file any divorce papers. Instead, she and her husband should go to counseling together and together find a more workable solution to resolve their shared desire to start a family. Damn legal dictionary. Damn lawyers. Why couldn't she have done this from the beginning? I almost howled. Why not just tell me about it instead of turning into a lecherous whore? Mr. Karras. Matt? The three voices sounded over each other before I slammed my fist on the table. I stared at the wooden surface and said slowly through clenched teeth, I'm already in counseling, I said. My therapist says the why question is like a funnel, and I can't heal until it fills up or at least stops growing further. He suggested that I ask Maeve to join us at one of our sessions in the future to address this issue. But here we are now, and I need to know. Why did you choose to bring strangers into our bed instead of just telling me about the medical problem we were supposed to be addressing? My client didn't, Philpott started to say, but Maeve interrupted him. I didn't want to hurt you by telling you that you can't have my baby. It's just that you like the physicality so much, and I didn't want you to think you weren't that kind of man, Maeve insisted. Oh my goodness, am I really such a big asshole? I asked, wondering if I was so ignorant of myself that I'd never noticed such a glaring character flaw in myself. No, she repeated. I say everything wrong. She took a breath and exhaled. If we could afford IVF, I'd tell you. But we would have had to either go into debt or wait a few years for the money to come in, and we really wanted to start a family now. So it was just an exercise for you with the donor. It wasn't to avoid the monotony of marriage by being with other men. Exactly, Maeve exclaimed. Oh God, why should I even want to go anywhere? So you haven't been enjoying yourself? She flinched at these words, but demurely continued. Don't you see? Yes, I called them folders on my page, but really it was all of you, wasn't it? All my memories were connected to you. Like in the multiverse, those comic book movies you love. I could add the memories of doing it with you, younger or older, to the wonderful memories I have of doing it with you now. And when you remembered those encounters, perhaps feeding the child that one of those alternate entities placed inside you, did you always think of your real self? She couldn't resist another grimace in response to my barbed words, but continued, Yes, always about you. I turned my head and looked determinedly at Attorney DeWitt. She raised her eyebrows slightly in question. I nodded just as silently. She reached for another folder circled in red, the nuclear weapons folder. As I spoke, Kelly slowly pulled out a series of photographs and placed them side by side in front of Maeve and her lawyer. The 8x10 color photos Kelly laid out were taken by the cameras mounted on the front and back walls of the house, as well as one of the videos I had taken Friday night while spying. I noticed that my wife's complexion had changed from gray to green. Maeve's face turned pale when she finally saw her actions through my eyes. She barely made it to the trash can by the conference room door before she threw up. Epilogue. Our house on 3rd Street sold quickly, and although we'd owned it for less than 2 years, its value had increased enough to pay off the mortgage and cover some of our moving expenses. I left Frank's apartment for a more work-friendly condominium, and Maeve moved back to bumfuck. I suppose the thought of meeting her at Starbucks was overwhelming to her. However, she was able to move into a small apartment rather than her childhood bedroom. She wasn't pregnant. My ex had also found a decent job that allowed for a reasonable lifestyle in such an inexpensive neighborhood. I was glad, because while the child support I'd been paying for 5 months wasn't a real burden on me, I was pleased to know that she wouldn't suddenly find herself destitute when it stopped after the 6th and final month. Of course, she had brought this misfortune upon us both, and the thought of her mad betrayal still held me in suspense, but she was the love of my life, and I had no doubt that her remorse and regret were sincere and as deep as my own. Her last letter said she still hoped we could reconcile. That's pretty damn unlikely, as my British friend would say. Nevertheless, dumping anger and despair and actively working on them has become a major component of my ongoing therapy. Frank and Kelly were right. Regular counseling did get me to stop thinking of myself as a big loser, whose life was essentially over, not counting another 40 or 50 years of dull gray monotony. As for Tracy, apparently her labor value in the office wasn't too highly regarded by the other executives in the firm, and she ended up becoming a barista at one of those Starbucks where Maeve was afraid to run into me. Tracy blamed Frank for her troubles for some reason, even though there was no indication that it wasn't just an accident. Nevertheless, the police checked him out properly and found witnesses and CCTV footage that clearly showed he was at a Foo Fighters concert that night when his former rival was eating bark. So, what does the future hold for me once I'm on the road to recovery? Well, after the last amount of spousal support is paid, I will have fulfilled all of my obligations in the divorce proceedings, and Kelly DeWitt will no longer be my acting attorney. When she found out I went to an art exhibit opening and was happy about it, she said she wished our first date had been at the gallery too. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for the next videos.